Okay. So, can you tell me your name and where you were born, a little bit about your family?
Oh, cool. My name is Edwin Green Jr.
Okay.
I was born and raised not far from here in Northeast Baltimore. When I grew up, the Memorial Stadium was still in existence, maybe 10 blocks from here. I grew up like 2 blocks from Memorial Stadium. I was so close that when a player hit a baseball, I could hear it from my bedroom window. The sound traveled that far. I grew up with both of my parents in the home, which is not atypical for the neighborhood in which I grew up in. So both of my parents were government employees. As a matter of fact, they both retired from Social Security Administration, the same agency that I work for. And we were, I guess, a typical middle-class family in that there were 2 parents, 3 kids. You might say 2.5 because my sister was born like when my parents was way too old to be still having children. I was raised in Baltimore City Public Schools. I started in schools in East Baltimore. I graduated from the Baltimore Polytechnic Institute, although I can't wear my ring anymore because the ring shrunk on me. Your father got the right size ring. Mine shrunk, that's why I don't wear it. And then I went off to Morgan for undergrad, went to Howard for grad school, and I'm back in Morgan again for grad school again.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Yep.
So why did you decide to get involved in the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah, so there's a lot to that. I'll try to be very brief. So service was something that was important in my household. Both of my parents were always involved in civic service type activities, but it was primarily through the church. So, my mother was on all kinds of ministries and boards and all of this kind of stuff. She did a lot of food service, food pantry, that kind of thing.
Okay.
My father was a little different in that he wasn't necessarily looking for service work, but if somebody asked him to do something, he would be more than willing to do it. That's the kind of dude that he is. Like, he's cool with just laying back, but if somebody requests him to do some work, he's all in. So the same was true for me. Growing up, being raised in the church, it was very important for me to be involved in the different activities that the church was involved in. It was all spiritually based. But then a wonderful thing happened in that I went to a historically black college, a historically black university, Morgan State. And my experience at Morgan State demonstrated for me that there were issues, specifically in the black community, that they were training me to be able to go out and address. One of the things that you get from the HBCU, at least that I got from the HBCU, is regardless of what your focus is of your studies, you can always use that knowledge to help better your community. And it highlighted all of the injustices, all of the difficulties that were in the black community, specifically low-income black community. And so where I was raised to be involved in service, it was, like I said, spiritually based. It was just kind of whoever needed help. Morgan helped me to focus it to be specifically for communities of color.
Okay.
And so being involved in the Black Lives Matter movement and the way that I'm involved in it is really just an offset of the way that I was raised to be involved, and then with the shaping of it from my HBCU.
Okay.
Represent.
That's just
Both of them, actually. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's
Just
right.
Howard is the same way. Yeah.
How does it make you feel when people say all lives matter or blue lives matter?
Well, so on the surface, emotionally, it's very irritating because I understand what creates the mindset of people to say things like that.
Yeah.
That's like your surface, like your initial response. But when you take the time to really think about all of the aspects of that thing, you begin to realize that it's really not an irritating thing. It's really an opportunity to help people to understand better. And so I know the reason why Black Lives Matter was created, and I believe in my heart that it was created for a good reason. And I recognize the fact that there are people in this world who don't agree with that reasoning. And so they created a counter narrative called All Lives Matter.
Blue Lives Matter.
Or Blue Lives Matter, the same thing, as if to kind of push away or to minimize the effect of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so one of the reasons why Black Lives Matter is important is because people don't recognize that Black lives do matter,
Yeah.
right? And it's not just in how we talk and how we engage, but it's in our actions. So if you go back even to, and I started to wear my t-shirt from the Black Museum in Memphis, but if you go back to the Civil Rights Movement, if you Google it, you will see pictures of people protesting, holding signs saying, "I am a man," right? And the purpose was that, the purpose of that was because, right, people didn't recognize Black men's humanity, that they were actually human beings. And so we have to proclaim the fact that we were men, that we were holy men.
That's a shame.
And even if you go back to our Constitution, it designated that we weren't fully 100% human. And so that kind of thinking just kind of permeates all the way through history, and we see it up until today. So the Black Lives Matter, while it's only been in existence for maybe 4 years, the movement has been going on since time immemorial, because it's always been the same thing. We've always had to explain or express the fact that we are fully human. And that's really the basis behind it.
Okay. How would you explain to a friend what the Black Lives Matter movement stands for? Because I personally have a friend, and he thinks the movement is kind of bogus. I don't understand why.
Yeah.
But like, if you had a friend like that, how would you explain it to him?
So, all right, so it's a couple of things. So, for me, the first thing that you have to take into consideration is who it is that you're talking to, right? Because your conversation with Black people, because there are some Black people who believe that Black Lives Matter is bogus as well.
Yeah.
Your conversation with them is different than your conversation with white folks. And it just has to be, just because our experiences are so vastly different. So if I had a white friend who said that Black Lives Matter is just bogus and it doesn't stand for anything, the first thing I would ask them is, what is it that you actually know about it, right? Like, have you read, have you studied, have you done research on it, or is this just based on conversation that you've had with people who think like you? Which is fine, but at least that gives you a standpoint to start the conversation, right? Because if they have these strong feelings about it and they haven't done any research, then you already kind of know like what you're dealing with, right? Okay. Black folks who say it, the approach for me is very different, because just because you're Black doesn't mean that you have the same experiences, obviously, because there's a spectrum. There's the Clarence Thomases all the way to the Malcolm X's, you know, very vast different experiences. However, thank you, there are commonalities with being Black that you have to acknowledge. And so when a Black person says that Black Lives Matter is just bogus, it's whack, it doesn't mean anything, I'm automatically thinking in my mind, from my clinical background, like, a therapist needs to be involved, because there's some other thing going on here for you to have that kind of stance. And so now I wouldn't recommend that they get a therapist, but that's, I'm like kind of sizing up who I'm talking to, right? Because that kind of guides the conversation. So for both of them, what I have to do is be astute on what it is that I know and what it is that I believe, and why I support it. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of people who support movements just because it's popular, just because it's fun, just because it's hot, just because it's hip. And that's a starting point, but at some point you've got to mature and progress to actually know what it is that you're focused on. So that's when the conversation progresses to, you know, we are systematically targeted in this country, specifically by law enforcement. And it's been going on since slavery, right? Law enforcement during slavery times was to intimidate, was to put fear in people's mind for social control. And it's the same basic concept now. I'll give you a for instance. So there was an African-American police officer who was killed in Baltimore City 2 weeks ago. And what law enforcement did in response to that, he was killed, I think, in West Baltimore. They actually sent police officers to West Baltimore to walk the neighborhood in full uniform and everything, under the guise that they were looking for the person who had killed the officer. Now let's just be real. If you shot a police officer in the head, it's very unlikely that you would be in your neighborhood where you live, just like chilling.
You'd be
right?
gone.
Like you would be gone. So you have to ask yourself the question, why would law enforcement send like 30, 40 cops to West Baltimore just to walk the neighborhood? Well, fear and intimidation. Like, this thing happened, and we're gonna make it so you understand that this thing can't happen again. Now, I don't disagree that it shouldn't happen again. Clearly, people shouldn't be killed for any reason. But it's still those same tactics that we've used year and year and year, over and over and over and over, to put fear in people's mind, which is really not what law enforcement is for.
Yeah.
They are for to serve and protect.
Not to put
And that's not what they do a lot of times. And so when you look at the statistics of deaths caused by police officers, the chart just goes way up with all ethnic groups. It's kind of like a flat line, but then when you get to black, it's like ridiculous. And it's all based upon, like we were talking about earlier, the humanity of black people, specifically black men, and how we are just automatically thought of as being more aggressive, more violent. And it's part of the narrative that's been portrayed in the media and, all different kinds of things. But I forgot the original question. I think everything I said was related to the question, but I forgot what it was.
Yeah, the original question was, how would you explain Black Lives Matter? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the impetus behind it. It was initially started to combat police brutality in African American communities, specifically the African American men. And it was the Trayvon Martin situation in Florida that kind of sparked all of it. And so it started off as just like a hashtag, Black Lives Matter, people just like talking about it. But then when the hashtag, right, him as well, all, I mean, the list is so long at this point, it's hard to even keep track. But after the hashtag phase got so much popularity, then it actually became a movement about 4 years ago. And now there's actually chapters across the country that are part of the overall Black Lives Matter organization.
Okay. You were in the Freddie Gray protest last night, right?
Yes, I was.
How would you say the atmosphere was?
So, there were a lot of young people. The atmosphere in those protest marches was varied. Because one, it was frustration of people. Because by the time Freddie Gray was killed, there were like 10 other black people across the country who had been killed. And this was just like, again?
You're like building up.
Yeah, you're just like, what is going on here? You know what I mean? But then, the part that you don't hear about is the people who actually came together in the protest activities. Well, actually, it was more unifying of black people than I had seen in a long time. It really felt to me like a protest movement of like the civil rights days, where people were actually coming together in what felt like a loving atmosphere for a common cause. And it wasn't just black folk in those protests. Yeah, it was everybody, which you need. You need everybody to be a part of those movements, because black folks can't do it. We would have never had success in the civil rights movement if it wasn't for the support of white folks and people of other ethnic groups. Because we were slaves. Like, what were we going to do on our own? But when that movement, those activities really felt like the collective effort. And it felt like we were moving towards something larger than what we had seen in the past. Yeah, because that situation was so egregious. I mean, the man, we had videotape, man. Like, it's there. He was fine before he had an encounter with the police. He had an encounter with the police, and then he became dead. Like, and what people try to tell us, right? And what they try to tell us is that we're not seeing what we're seeing, and that is frustrating in and of itself, because we know what the larger picture is, and this is just an offset of all of the things that are going on a larger scale, and it's the same stuff. So we're not hanging black men by trees in the days of lynching, but if you're a police officer and you kill a black person, the likelihood is
you're gonna get off.
You'll be off, and we saw that happen in Baltimore City. But the positive side is we had a state's attorney who was willing to fight the fight. Now, she didn't win the cases, but what she did was send a message that said that you can't do this kind of thing in Baltimore City and at least not have a fight. Because there are state's attorneys across the country who wouldn't even indict. They wouldn't even bring charges against the officers, and most of them have not had charges brought against them. But we can say in Baltimore City that we had a woman who said, oh no, not on my watch. So she tried, and it was a winless battle, because you just don't win in cases against police. But she tried. She didn't just bend over and just sorry for that reference. She didn't just lie down and just let it ride, but she tried.
And I also read that they were the charges. They were supposed to be charged with second-degree murder, manslaughter, assault, and misconduct in office. But I read later that it was the charges were basically dropped. It didn't. Yeah. So how does that make you feel?
Well, so it's kind of complex because, like I said, on the one hand, it was exciting because at least we did have indictments and charges brought. And I think that was significant. It doesn't get as much conversation as I believe it should, but that was really significant because when the Trayvon Martin situation happened, the state's attorney, it was so crazy. She was on the news during the press conference talking about why she wasn't bringing charges. And it almost felt like she was the defense for the killer, Zimmerman. And I literally had in my mind to try to figure out, like, who is she working for? Like, who's speaking here? Yeah. And she had this grimace, like, it was the weirdest kind of thing. So we didn't have that. But we did have somebody, a black woman, and I think that's significant as well, who said, no, not on my watch, we're gonna bring charges. So there was some pride in the fact that we were able to do at least that, but it was still a hurting thing. Because like I said, he was fine, he was alive, he had an encounter with the police, he became dead. That's a problem. And for nobody to be held responsible for that, it's just like, again, and that's why Black Lives Matter is so important, because we have to tell folk that you just can't do that to us and just not have any repercussions for it. Now, we haven't gotten there yet, but we're working on it.
Oh, yeah. We're getting there eventually.
We're getting there eventually.
What are the next steps in the Black Lives Matter movement? Yeah, where should the movement focus next? Since you've had...
Yes. Yeah. That's an excellent question. You're a very intelligent young man.
Thank you.
So, what's next? So, another thing that people don't know is the movement is guided by what we call guiding principles, and there's like 10 of them. And so one of the things that and I want to highlight that because people think that this is just us just kind of acting out and protesting, but it's really an intelligent, strategic movement. And so that's why the chapters are very important, because the local chapters kind of feed off the national, and so you kind of push it at the local level wherever you are, and you kind of cater it to your own particular city. But one of the big guiding principles that I'm really interested in is this whole notion of restorative justice, right? And people don't talk about that a lot, but that's extremely important. And the basis of that is, we know that there's the school to prison pipeline. I mean, it's factual. We know that it exists and it's happening. We know that slavery occurred. It's factual, it actually happened. So what are we gonna do in terms of making amends for all of that wrong that's been done to our people? And so that aspect has gotten me most excited, because I believe that, it takes, I saw a statistic that said it would take 5 generations, I think is accurate. 5 generations, I think is what it was. I wish I had looked it up. But the point is, it would take a long time. And people often look at where we are now and kind of point the finger, like black people should be better. Well, how many of y'all went through 400 years of the type of oppression that we went through? And it still is occurring. So this restorative justice piece is talking about how do we make amends to help bring black folk up to where they should be. And the Black Lives Movement is really spearheading that conversation, because it always starts with a conversation. Then you move to legislation, and then you move into actual implementation at the local level. Now, one of the difficulties is, in Baltimore City, we had a consent decree under the former administration, under the Obama administration, that was specifically for our city, that addressed specific needs with our city and the police force. And we were actually working together. There were conversations between the community, the mayor's office, the police force, and everybody was cooperative. Now, this new administration came in, and there's a gentleman by the name of I use gentlemen lightly, but Mr. Sessions, who was in charge of the Department of Justice, who said, oh, no, we don't want that kind of stuff. And he's trying to push it back, trying to set it back to the way that things were, I guess, in his time. And so those are the kind of things that we have to continue to fight against. The folk who are in high-ranking positions, who are trying to stop progress while still trying to get progress going at the local level. So it's all of these different dimensions. But the good part, again, is that we have people working in all different aspects of it who can push their piece. So if we stay in our lane and we take care of our piece, then the collective should be moving forward in a positive way.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time.
That's it. Man, I can do this for another hour.